Okay, here we see our 2011 Porsche Cayenne. Now, this is actually the 4.8 liter bi-turbo engine, and what we're after is the low pressure fuel pump. And now we have a associated array of fault codes dealing with both the low pressure and high pressure fuel pumps. But before you condemn a high pressure fuel pump or the high pressure fuel rail sensor, don't forget that a high pressure fuel pump can't very well work unless, of course, I have the low pressure fuel pump supplying it. Now the symptom is that long crank, and normally what happens is this long crank symptom is only after an overnight sit. After the vehicle sits overnight, there's an extended crank period, and sometimes I actually set a hard fault code and get a loss of engine power warning. Now, when we're actually cycling the key and listening to the fuel pump, the in-tank fuel pump has a tendency to whine and make a lot of noise. And we're going to try and demonstrate that now. Now, after removing the rear seat, there was a tremendous amount of debris under the seat. Goldfish crackers, candy wrappers, etc. And I used this vacuum cleaner to vacuum that up. And as I removed the aluminum cover that simply held with four 10mm fasteners, I wanted to carefully vacuum this area. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the air gun out, the shop air, and I'm going to blast this with the air gun to clear all of the dust, debris, and dirt. And, of course, vacuum up. Now, I'm outside. I'm not inside a garage. And one thing you want to be very careful, when you're dealing with gasoline and large amounts of gasoline vapor, it's really foolish to be in a confined space or inside a garage. Heaven help us if there's a fire started. But hey, it's well away from the building, and I have a garden hose with a nice nozzle right here handy. Okay, at this point I've used a combination of the vacuum cleaner and the blowgun to carefully clean the dirt and debris here from the pump cover and here around the insert. I've carefully lubricated my retaining ring. I have not disconnected any fuel lines or electrical connectors at this point. The vacuum cleaner and blowgun are removed from the area, and remember, do not use a vacuum cleaner if you have any type of fuel vapor or liquid fuel in the area. That is indeed a source of ignition. Now I'm ready to remove the electrical connectors and remove the retainer. Now, for removing the electrical connector for obviously the intake sending unit, this has a safety tang that you have to lift up first and then just simply push it back, and then that will release the catch and allow you to unplug this connector. Now this is a little more involved, and what they want you to do is reach under here and very carefully depress this release. Now what happens is a little stubborn. Sometimes you kind of have to wiggle it, push it down, or maybe even get underneath and help it. You don't want to break it, and then it will release, and then you can pull this loose. Now in these quick disconnects, what I want to do is I just very carefully squeeze this nylon retainer, and it will expand. If you can look straight in there, you can actually see how it expands when I press this in, and it releases the fuel line, and of course the actual seal is an O-ring inside. Now what I've done is I've used a bronze screwdriver, carefully releasing the retainer. Now of course I did this before I open the lines, because obviously you don't want any gasoline here, and I just simply use my carpethane hammer and my bronze screwdriver, and that worked very nicely to remove the retainer. So the retainer comes out. Now note the position of the arrow, and we'll go ahead and just very carefully lift the retainer out past the fuel lines, and I'm ready to lift the fuel pump module. Okay, here we have our 2011 Porsche Cayenne. This is the 4.8 liter bi-turbo engine, and we're replacing the low pressure fuel pump. Now this is going to be the side of the fuel tank that the low pressure fuel pump is on, and the first thing you want to do is you have to remove the whole rear seat. Now, why do I say you have to remove both sections of the rear seat? Well, what you'll see in just a minute is you cannot pull the fuel pump module from the tank with the hose going up to the outlet to the high pressure pump. You have to take that loose from the fuel filter, which is on this side of the tank. Both sides must come out. Now, obviously, after you remove the aluminum cover, you want to carefully vacuum and be sure that you do both vacuum operations before you expose any gasoline to the area, because there's nothing more dangerous than a vacuum cleaner in gasoline. And I also recommend doing this outside. Then I follow with a careful blasting of all the dust and the dirt with shop air, there with the air hose and the blowgun. And then I carefully lubricate and then remove the retaining rings. And bless their hearts, here at Porsche they have very nice heavy-duty retaining rings that slide nicely, no problem. Now there's an arrow that denotes a location, because you'll find that one of the tabs is wider than the other. And the same thing on this side. Now I've purchased a new fuel pump, and we're going to go take a look at the old pump and the new pump right now. Now, here we see the old fuel pump, and it has, of course, this plastic cap that's part of the housing. And this is the new fuel pump. And one thing that's rather interesting here, I paid half the price that I would pay at the dealer. This was about $250 on eBay Motors. You'll notice it is indeed a VDO. And you'll also notice that the emblem for Volkswagen and Audi and their part number is actually purposely scratched out. But as far as I can tell, it's absolutely identical. So I'm getting the identical Porsche OEM part for less than half price. Now you're going to need this whole assembly. I wouldn't try just replacing the electric motor there or the electric pump in the middle, and you'll see why in a moment. And now this is going to be the discharge of the pump as it goes across to the other side of the tank to the filter. And here, let's hold this up here just for a moment so that you can see it. This actually is going to fit on top. This hose right here is what's coming from the filter to the pressure regulator. This is the pressure regulator. And off she goes there to the high pressure fuel pump. There on the back of the left cylinder head. Now you'll notice on this pressure regulator that I have this grounding wire. As you disconnect this, don't try and disconnect the little ground connector, because it's going to come with the unit. So the only electrical connectors I'm unplugging is this is for the pump, and this is for the sending unit on the right side of the vehicle. Okay, now let's take a look. This is actually the pump, and as you can see, one of these hoses is going to be coming over here. Actually, it's this one right here, and then I have another hose that is going to be leaving to the pressure regulator, and we see it right here. And again, this has a little wire that comes up to the grounding terminal. Don't try and disconnect that. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a new pump, and then I did a new filter. I did purchase a new filter, but I don't have it yet, and it cost almost as much as the pump. It was about $160. If I had tried harder, I might be able to get it cheaper. This is as heavy as a brick, and unfortunately, when I pulled this off, I could just see, I'm not sure whether to call it rust, because there is no rust in this tank. This tank is lined with that nylon material. This tank is made out of plastic. There's no metal in this tank. And as I looked at the old pump, and I've blown this out carefully with shop air, get that gasoline out, I noticed that there was a lot of, it's kind of hard to see right there, but there was a lot of debris there in the bottom, and obviously the only place that could have come from was, of course, obviously the gas station. But this has 150,000 miles on it, so a lot of gasoline passed through this pump. If the debris in the filter was coming strictly from a decaying pump, then I wouldn't see any debris here, but there we do. Maybe I should take that back, because actually, no, that's, I would say that's because part of the pump's output is for the jet valve, which is there down in the tank. You can actually see it there as you look down at the tank. And what's that for? I'm constantly working to take the contents of the right tank and move it into the left, of the left tank and move it into the right side, the passenger side where the pump is. And then as it overflows, it just flows over back to the left side. So as the fuel level drops, then all of the fuel will collect over on the right side there with the pump. And the jet valve, which we'll see just a moment, its discharge is dumping into this well right here. So what happens theoretically, I can take the level of the fuel tank almost all the way down to the bottom, so there's almost no fuel in the tank, and I'll still have enough fuel for the pump to operate that last little bit before I completely run out. Okay, we went ahead and installed the new pump, and I wanted to talk about its installation. Now, you'll notice that as you look down in the tank, there's a special base that's part of the tank that retains this pump, and it has a slot in it, and you'll see the slot. So obviously make sure that's lined up, and then you'll actually twist it clockwise, counterclockwise to release, clockwise to install, and you'll feel it click. It's not that hard. You can do it by hand. Now, this opening is good size, but unfortunately what happens is that, and you'll see in a moment, the actual outlet pipe gets in the way. If that's there, you can't pull this through the opening. It just barely fits with that pipe there. That's why you have to take that loose from the filter and pull that assembly out, and you'll see in just a moment. Now, here we see the electrical connector for the pump, and I see, of course, a ground wire, and then of course I see 3 wires in the way this pump is designed. Now what happens, this hose right here actually fastens to the pump, and you do not want to take this off. To leave this alone, you're actually going to reach through the tank and go over to the filter and take it loose from the filter. Now, as far as the area in the tank, this opening is big enough where you can actually reach your hand all the way down and actually go across the top section of the tank. It's not very narrow, it's good and thick to the other side, so there's no problem getting these tubes to the other side. And you'll see a network of tubes to the filter, from the filter back, and then the jet pump tubes going back. And as you'll see in the top of the fuel filter assembly, the 2 jet pump discharges are right here. There's nothing here. So now let's move over to the vehicle. Boy, do I wish I had a new fuel filter. This thing's heavy as a brick and filled with material, but I don't, and because I buy things online, it takes, a week to get things, sometimes a little faster, sometimes a little slower. We see that it's made in the Czech Republic. This was, as far as I can tell, this is the absolute original equipment. So from 2011 with 150,000 miles on it. It's past due. But oftentimes what I like to do is compare the weight of a new filter with the old filter, and that gives you the indication of the packing. I've blasted this out with air so there's no gasoline left in it, and sure enough a lot of rust came out. It seems to be clear enough though that I think it will perform satisfactorily. As I mentioned, there is a new fuel filter coming, which I'll have to install at a later date. So, but if you buy a pump, doesn't it kind of make sense to get the filter with it? And of course, this isn't cheap. This, as I mentioned earlier, this costs more than half the cost of the pump. The filter costs more than half the cost of the pump. Now, this is where the filter goes. Here we see the outlet of the fuel pump comes into the filter, goes from the outside to the inside of the pleats, and here we see the discharge of the filter. This goes across, and we'll see it right here. It's going to this port right here, and this is what goes off to the inlet of the high pressure pump. Now, of course, I also have my fuel pressure regulator right there, and of course we talked about that earlier. Plenty of room to run the tubes back and forth. And then here we see the electrical connector for the sending unit on the left side. And again, on our little ground wire, don't disconnect that. Leave that alone, because it's not going anywhere. It's just going there to the base of the filter. Just want to make sure that we don't develop any type of electrical potential there as the fuel rushes around. So we're going to connect it there to the ground of the vehicle. Nice, sturdy retaining ring, and there's an arrow. Note the position of the arrow. Lets you know where this is to be positioned correctly. Now let's take a look at this side over here. Okay, now of course obviously I'm looking at the right side, the passenger side of the vehicle now. Here we see the discharge right here. Here we see the outlet from the fuel filter. Here's the pressure regulator. I have another one of these grounding wires. Here we see the electrical connector for the fuel pump, and there's another smaller connector that's fallen down that I'll easily pick up that plugs in for the sending unit. And then I'm going to have the tubes here. This is the discharge there to the high pressure pump, and this is actually a tank vent valve, and there's a rollover valve underneath it. So if I go upside down, what happens is that closes, or if the fuel tank's very full, it closes and blocks this passage. That's just simply a vapor it's an evaporative emissions vent tube right there. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and continue our installation. Now this is the fuel filter. This is the electrical connector for the sending unit for the left side, the driver's side of the fuel tank. Now I like these snap ring pliers, and I use them for lots of things besides snap rings, and they're excellent to go ahead and reposition and tighten this retaining ring. Works very nicely, and the way Porsche has designed it, these teeth here are acting kind of like a ratchet, so it's very, very good for putting it on. It probably work okay for taking it off too. All right, now here's my connector for the sending unit for the driver's side. There we go. So we're done on this side. Now we're getting ready to move to the fuel pump. Okay, now we're looking at the right side, the passenger side of the vehicle. Now there's this seal, and it would have been very nice to have a new seal. This would have been very nice, but I didn't get a new seal. I didn't really see one readily available. Maybe I needed to look harder, but it seemed like this one could be reused. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that this, you go ahead and take this loose and just go ahead and gently push this down in the tank, because it has kind of a skirt on it that's very difficult to deal with if it's up here around the actual port and connectors. All right, now here I have the electrical connector for the pump, and here I see my electrical connector for the sending unit. We mustn't forget that. There's only one way that will go on. There's a nice release tab there on the side. But what I wanted to point out here is make sure that you put this down in the tank first, and then this slides in pretty easily. Okay, there it's slid down nicely and it's sealed. Don't forget to plug the sending unit in. I have the pump plugged in. Now, as you look very carefully at this connector, you may see a slight discoloration, but there wasn't any evidence of a problem on the other side or with the harness. But obviously that's a high current carrier right there. Now I'm ready to go ahead and put the ring on. Now here's I use the snap ring pliers. They work very nicely, and I can kind of very precisely control how much I apply tension to this, and as you can actually hear it and see it, it's actually walking up the ramp, and I hear it solidly ratcheting there, so that's good. Nice and easy, no great big swings with the hammer, and works very nicely. It could be also used to take it out also. Now obviously here's the connector that's going to be the fuel pump connector. Let's go ahead and get him pulled out. And here's the connector for the sending unit. Whatever you do, don't forget those. Now I had carefully cleaned this area first, try and get the sand, dirt, and debris out. We definitely want to keep that away from the tank. This is actually a evaporative emission control tank vent with a rollover check valve. And here we see this is the actual critical member This is the line going up to the high pressure fuel pump, one pump here on this side. I mean on this style, on this engine. Many of the V8s have two pumps. This is my sending unit, and very easy to release this one. This one's a little more of a pain right here. I think what their idea was is somehow that you kind of carefully pry this back like that, but that wasn't working very nicely. I can see it lift there right now, but what happened when it was actually on the vehicle, I actually had to get up under it to lift it up. So here we go, and here we go. We're ready to go. We're ready for a test. Now, as you can hear, that pump, after of course I bled it of air, is much, much quieter than it ever was before. Very quiet. All right, let's go ahead and start the vehicle. Okay, let's try again. Alrighty, we're trying again. Well, after installing the new fuel pump, and of course we had to go back with the old filter, we'll get the new filter in about a week. First thing we want to do is, well, we could actually try and start the vehicle, but it may take a moment to develop fuel pressure. But what I could do is go to the active test features of my scan tool, and there we have a feature for the electric fuel pump. And I can go ahead and let's go at 100%. This is, of course, the duty cycle control from the fuel pump module. So there you go. We hear the pumps running. Sounds a little different than it did before. It's pushing hard against that fuel filter, obviously. And what's happening is the fuel pump picks up the fuel, sends it around to the fuel filter, and then out to the high pressure pump. And then there's a second port on the fuel pump that goes to the jet valve, and it's constantly transporting fuel from the left side of the tank, that is the driver's side, to the right side of the tank all the time. So that as I run out of fuel, all the fuel will be on the right side until I take it all the way to empty. Now, what we found was that the it starts up briskly now, but the test is obviously going to be sitting overnight, and we cleared all our fault codes dealing with the high pressure, low pressure pump, and we'll just have to make sure everything's okay here as we evaluate the vehicle. Right, now obviously I have to remove both rear seats, and I have the larger rear seat and then the smaller rear seat, and they're held with these spline drive. I think they call this triple hex, and this is very popular with Volkswagen Auto Group. If you're working on Volkswagens, Audis, Porsches, or any other of the Volkswagen brands, obviously you have a set of these, and I actually have a big set. This one is nice. I have some real short, stubby ones that are very nice for, like, you know, brake calipers and things like that, or you're working on the actual CV joint. They're going to a axle or up to the flange of the automatic transmission. You're going to need these. And then, of course, obviously cylinder head bolts and all kinds of fasteners here and there. Volkswagen really likes that, and they seem to work nice. They resist stripping out. Now you'll notice that I have some looks like Loctite red on these bolts for the back seat there in the back, and didn't seem to be much there. I think there was a little evidence of something maybe on one of these, but There we go. No, these didn't seem to have it, but these definitely had to work to take these loose. But no problem, a good high quality spline or triple hex, and out she came. And then of course, obviously, when you're working there, and I noticed that my fuel pump just came on a moment. I have the key in the car. You be careful, you know, don't be sure this is disconnected there when you're working on the vehicle. Now obviously I had to disconnect these connectors here from the rear seat, and of course this is any times it's yellow like this, well, that's usually indicating a supplemental restraint system, either one of the seat belts, or just simply alerting that there is a passenger in the rear seat. I'm not seeing any evidence of an airbag right offhand, but definitely we want to be sensitive to that. Now I got fault code obviously, which I'll clear after I put everything together. Now as we look over here, we see our fuel filter. Yes, this is the fuel filter. This is the connector for the driver's side or left side sending unit. I'm going to be replacing that, but I don't have it, so I had to go back with the old one. So we'll go ahead and put the vehicle completely back together and return it to service, and then when the filter comes in, we'll schedule another visit and have to take it back apart again. Removing the seats the second time will be very easy, and this seat on this side is very heavy, so you want to get your partner to give you a hand. And of course, remember, with this high quality leather, you don't want to mar it, scratch it, or cut it. And by the way, the seat bottoms, they just pull up. You just pull gently. There are 2 on this side and there are 3 on this side. I had to coax one a little bit, but it came right up.